I'm going to be talking about my family and my home today, so it would be remiss of me to mention them without talking a little bit about the unrest happening. I can't report on it myself, unfortunately, but the next best thing I can do is to ask you to take a few minutes to look at what's going on in Hong Kong. So I grew up in Hong Kong, and as a kid, we would eat shark fin soup, mostly on special occasions. My sister especially loved it. I didn't really think about where it came from, probably in the same way that you didn't really think about where your food came from when you were a kid too. I don't remember exactly when I decided to stop eating shark fin soup or when I asked my family to, but I do know it's because of the stories I read and the photos I saw and the videos I watched. And now as a storyteller, I'm trying to change minds too. This is a photo that I took in Sri Lanka not too long ago. This is my aunt. Over there in the middle, that's my uncle. He's talking to my mom. And my aunt is showing me where she keeps her expensive dried seafood goods, like fish bladder and manta ray gills. I had no idea that she had these things. She started showing me other things she had. She had cow gallstone, which she takes when she feels headaches that are a remnant of a stroke she had a couple years ago. And to my surprise, she also showed me a small nub of rhino horn that a friend had given her many years ago for a thyroid problem. If you asked the English-speaking internet, they would probably tell you that she were stupid, ignorant, barbaric, a monster. But I know she's not those things. Chinese demand is causing a lot of animals to go extinct. But when we make generalizations about China, this vast, diverse country, it's not helpful. Even for me, I sometimes feel alienated or that I'm being talked about like I'm not there. As a visual storyteller, I've been exploring traditional Chinese medicine, its users, and where the ingredients come from. This photo is from a market in Guangzhou where you can see that the amount of wildlife being sold, in this case seahorses, is absolutely mind-boggling. I'm hoping that my photos can help spark an informed, nuanced, empathetic, compassionate conversation about what's going on. If we're going to solve the environmental crisis, we need to talk to people. We need to invite them to the table, and we need to involve them in our solutions. And we're going to need nuance and compassion and empathy. And that's why I'm so excited about our panel today, because that's exactly what it's about. So please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Dominique Gonçalves. She's an ecologist working at Gorongosa National Park, and she's a National Geographic Fellow.
Thank you. Oops, not yet. As a Mozambican woman, it's a great honor to be here and to represent my colleagues in Gorongosa National Park. Gorongosa is known to some of you as a wildlife restoration success story. In the last decade, our large population, animal population, increased from 10,000 to 100,000. But, thank you. But Gorongosa isn't only about restoring wildlife. It is also about restoring people's life. When we see our park in the greater landscape, and we think about the challenges we face today, we also think about what can we do to ensure that people and wildlife have a healthy and safe future. These are some of the reasons why Gorongosa is being successful. First, management. Gorongosa is co-managed in a 35-year private-public partnership between the government of Mozambique and the Greg Carr Foundation. This partnership gives us a lot of independence and flexibility. We can try new things, and we can adapt quickly when we see that one idea don't work. Second, conservation and science. Gorongosa has many other wild places in Africa and around the world, many threats. But we have been holding the line. Our rangers reduced poaching by 72%, and they kept the worst of the illegal wildlife trade at our door. So protection is critical. But you can't protect what you don't know you have. So we're constantly documenting and monitoring our biodiversity. We want to know our animals and plant species. We want to understand their relationships and what benefits they give us. This is what we do at the E.O. Wilson Biodiversity Laboratory in Gorongosa. A month ago, we celebrated recording our 6,000 species, and it's already going more and more. Third, benefits. Simply put, a national park is an opportunity cost to local people. The people can live, farm, or hunt there. And sometimes, the elephants that I study go to their farms and raid their crops. So you have to pay the opportunity cost back to people and give benefits. We provide decent jobs to 650 people, but not everyone can have a job. So we work with the government to deliver healthcare to people, agricultural assistance to families, and education support, especially for vulnerable girls. We believe that when we give enough benefits, people listen. And if you listen back, you'll become partners. Fourth, funding. Of course, providing all these benefits is expensive. National parks are often underfunded. So we look for partnerships with organizations, groups that normally don't do conservation, but they focus on human development. These groups want a reliable partner. We have the staff, we have the infrastructure, we know the place, we have strong relationships with the people, with our communities. So it becomes a win-win for everyone. But we don't want to rely on donors forever. We're starting now to think of sustainable funding sources. We're growing shade-grown coffee at Mount Gorongosa. It not only helps funding the park programs, but also gives income to the local farmer and helps protect the rainforest at the mountain. Lastly, think long-term. You know, as I said, we are long-term, 35 years. This way, the people know that you're not there just one day and gone the next. They engage, they trust you. And you also have to think about climate change. This was brought home to us on the 9th of March 14th, when Cyclone Idai smashed into Mozambique, taking more than 1,000 lives, destroying most of my home city of Beira and local communities around Gorongosa. During the cyclone, the park absorbed 800,000, Olympic-sized swimming pools of water. Overnight, our entire staff became relief workers. Since then, we have delivered 390 tons of food over to 79,000 people. We're now starting to give seeds to farmers to regrow their lost crops. We are now starting a multi-year effort to rebuild the schools, the clinics, the roads, the homes. So you can't just think small anymore. For us, it's more than just protecting a conservation area now. We have to think more than our borders and see our place in the greater landscape. Because after all we want is also long-term coexistence and balance. And I believe that educating girls will take us there. The reason, thank you. The reason I'm standing here today is because of Gorongosa efforts to change gender norms and elevate Mozambican women. If you teach girls or women, if you teach women, engage women, and empower women, our potential will be unleashed. We will lift up our communities, and we will protect these wild places we all depend on for a healthy, safe future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominique. Thank you. Next up, we have the Director for Latin America for National Geographic's Pristine Seas project, Alex Muñoz.
Thank you. How do you imagine a pristine sea looks like? Just all of us take a moment and let's get a picture of a pristine seas in our heads. Do you have it? Well, this is the picture of a pristine sea that I have in my head. For me, it looks like a watch, the inside of a watch. You have big wheels, you have middle size, you have smaller wheels. And although they are all different, they all make sense together. And they enable this watch to give us the exact time. If you add a wheel or if you lose one, this watch will be broken. It will never tell us the exact time anymore. Let me show you a picture of this watch in the wild ocean. This is Mexico, the Revillagigedo Islands. A few years ago, we went on a Pristine Seas expedition to these islands, and we found this incredibly healthy ecosystem with all the right parts. You have the big fish, the sharks, the mantas, the smaller fish, the algae, and let alone diving there. What an unbelievable experience was to dive with those giant mantas that thrive in that place. And now let me tell you about a luxury watch in another place in the south. Just imagine a brand of a luxury watch. Let me tell you about Cape Horn in the south of Chile. A few years ago, we went again on an unbelievable expedition of pristine seas to the south. And in Cape Horn, we were diving in this kelp forest. And with my friend and colleague, Pelayo Salinas, we were going down this kelp forest, and suddenly we saw that the floor was moving. It was very strange. And then we got closer and closer and deeper, and we saw these thousands and thousands of crabs and dozens of different species eating each other in this phenomenal ecosystem, a pristine and intact ecosystem. This is how the oceans should be like. But is this the image that we usually see in today's oceans? Unfortunately not. This is bottom trawling, one of the most evil inventions of humankind. This is how they are fishing hake very near Cape Horn in my country, Chile. This is a coral reef that must be 1,000 years old that was cut by one of these trawlers. And in the north of my country, the fishing vessels that were fishing anchoveta saw these dolphins feeding in this place, and they decided to throw their nets anyway. All these dolphins died. And very near there, only 2 months ago, they found this dead dolphin that was a victim of fishing with dynamite. And you know the story of the vaquita in Mexico, the most threatened marine mammal in the world. Some scientists anticipate that this species will be extinct this year because of the bad fishing practices and ineffective conservation efforts. So the oceans are in big trouble, and we have one more chance to save them. Enrique Sala, National Geographic Explorer, created Pristine Seas 10 years ago, and we have an amazing team from different fields and countries that most of them are here in this audience. And we have one goal in mind: protecting the last wild places in the world's oceans. And the way we do that is by creating large marine reserves that not only protect the rich biodiversity, but also they bring the fish back, they bring jobs back, they feed people, and they make these marine ecosystems more resilient to climate change. So it's a pretty good solution if you think about it. Sometimes I get the question, what's the right approach for doing that? Is that a top-down approach? Do you just shake hands with the president and then just order the creation of a marine reserve? Or a bottom-up approach? Do you work with a local community and then wait until the rest of the society understands their proposal? Actually, we think that it's both at the same time. We work with different actors, different groups that usually are in opposite sides of the street, opposite sides of a debate, and just make them be aware of the facts, scientific facts, and make them listen to each other so they can build a common solution together. This is Juan Fernandez fishing community. Juan Fernandez is an archipelago in Chile, and it's one of the most environmentally advanced communities I've ever met. In the 1930s, they already figured out the way to manage their lobster fishery, which is today one of the most sustainable fisheries in the world. And we worked with them for many years, and they understood the facts, the science that we brought, and they proposed the creation of the 2 largest marine reserves in Chile. And we have worked with many communities and indigenous peoples in different parts of Latin America to do the same. Also, we work with scientists from our team and local scientists that usually know more about the place than us. And we work together, and they perform these great explorations to build the scientific support for these proposals. And we use technology like this amazing submarine or the drop cameras that were invented by National Geographic and enable us to know the seafloor and the deep sea like never before. And we put together these amazing documentaries. And these are so important because, unfortunately, information doesn't move the world. Emotions move the world. And when people see our shows, they just fall in love with this place. Presidents, communities, everyone wants to protect these places once they see our shows. Recently, we have incorporated a new tool, satellite images. And we have Juan Mayorga here that does this amazing analysis to estimate the economic impacts of closing an area. And we work with visionary leaders like former President of Chile, Michelle Bachelet, that was brave enough to create 3 large marine reserves that are the largest in Latin America. So, is this enough? No, we're going even further. This is something we should be very proud of. Chile and Argentina, 2 different countries working with National Geographic together on a joint expedition to Antarctic Peninsula. Just remember that both countries almost went to war 40 years ago because of a territorial dispute. And now they're working together for science and marine conservation, and they have jointly proposed the conservation and protection of Antarctic Peninsula. That's really outstanding in terms of the relationship that we're building. So, what has been the result of this? In a period of 8 years, Chile went from almost 0 to 24% of its waters protected, creating 4 marine parks fully protected, covering nearly 1 million square kilometers of ocean. Mexico created the largest marine reserve in North America, 150,000 square kilometers protected in the Revillagigedo Islands. Argentina just created 2 reserves, jumping from 2 to 9% of its water protected, adding 100,000 square kilometers of ocean protected. Ecuador created the first large marine sanctuary in the Darwin and Wolf Islands, in the Galapagos Islands, which is the sharkiest place on Earth. Colombia expanded its marine park from 7,000 to 27,000 square kilometers that is fully protected. So that's what has been done in Latin America. In total, 11 big marine reserves, 7 of them in the last few years. Our impact has been even global. We have done 30 expeditions. We have helped create 21 marine reserves covering over 5 million square kilometers of ocean that today are totally protected. Yeah. Of course, we didn't do this alone. Nobody can. Not National Geographic, not a country, not an NGO, not a group of scientists. We have to work all together and be very smart and strategic about this. And don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean that we don't see our differences and tell everybody what we think about the problems. We have a responsibility to tell the world what those problems are. We have to be faithful to the truth. But the house is on fire. And at the end of the day, we only have each other to put that fire out. We have to work together. That's why we have decided to throw a more ambitious project. National Geographic, together with the Waste Foundation, have launched the Last Wild Places and the Campaign for Future to protect 30% of the planet. And we need to keep working together. We need each one of you in this room and everybody outside this room to be involved. Your support and your engagement really matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Our final speaker is an ecologist working for the American Prairie Reserve and a National Geographic Fellow. Please welcome Ray Wynn-Grant.
Thank you. I grew up in big cities, and it wasn't until I was 20 years old, a young adult, that I had my first experience in nature. I went on my first hike, I pitched my first tent, and I saw my first wild animal. And without a doubt, it changed my life. Because ever since then, I have dedicated my life and my career to the study of carnivore ecology, mainly African lions, and now I'm no National Geographic photographer, so these are my own pictures of lions I collared, and black bears in North America. And when it comes to bears, some people view them as vicious, ferocious animals that have something against us. But through my work, I've come to view them as quiet, dignified ecosystem engineers that have a lot in common with people. We like to eat the same foods. Fortunately or unfortunately, we like to live in the same places. We're concerned about raising our offspring in safe, nurturing environments. And we all like to sleep a whole lot. And when it comes to bears, like many carnivores all over the world, some of the biggest conservation challenges surround their interactions with people. And that has informed a lot of my work and focused it in many ways. So my ecology work on carnivores largely surrounds those populations at the human-wildland interface, or at the spaces where people and wild animals overlap. And it's this expertise that helped to develop my fellowship with the American Prairie Reserve. APR is on a mission to create the largest protected area in the continental United States. Located in eastern central Montana, APR is working to rewild part of the American Great Plains, and at the same time, to work with cattle ranching communities to create wildlife-friendly ranching practices, something virtually unheard of in many parts of the world. APR is also on a mission to diversify local economies, to support people and give communities a very bright future. And most importantly to me, we're working together to solve human-wildlife conflict problems and even prevent them before they start. Now, a fully restored ecosystem in the American Great Plains requires the conservation of grizzly bears and other threatened species in the ecosystem. These bears in particular are my focus area right now, and as part of a conservation success story in the United States, they have been growing in population size and migrating out of protected areas like Yellowstone and Glacier National Park faster than many of us thought was possible. They are quite literally walking over to their historic habitat in the prairie. And as a conservationist, this makes me very excited. However, there are a lot of people who aren't as excited. And the American Prairie Reserve, and me and my colleagues, along with state wildlife agencies, Small and large NGOs, local stakeholders, and entire communities are coming together and working together to answer a lot of questions that are arising and to create really effective action plans to make sure that we are protecting wildlife where there are people and protecting people where there are wildlife. And so these 3 protected areas that are or will be strongholds for grizzly bears and other wildlife are very, very important. And one of the most important things is that there's some type of connectivity between the 3. Dispersal isn't effective unless, conservation isn't effective unless there's some type of sustained, safe dispersal. I am particularly interested in corridors that might be found between these 3 areas. Those 3 strongholds create essentially a triangle. And we believe that with safe corridors for wildlife, as well as stepping stones of high-quality wildlife habitat, we can maintain effective dispersal of individual bears as well as genetic material between these 3 protected areas. This will lead to conservation success and ultimately the persistence of populations of grizzly bears and many threatened wildlife species in Montana. And so I did some work to fuse technical science with field work, with basic bear biology. And I collected a lot of information about the landscape, everything from tree and forest cover to waterways, and things about the human landscape, like the distribution of roads and highways, human population density, cities and towns. Coupling those things that represent the landscape with basic science about bears and carnivores, their pure biology. And I used this information in a statistical framework that uses circuit theory from electrical engineering to make predictions about how the landscape looks to an animal. What are the most resistant parts of the landscape to move through? And what are the most accessible or least resistant parts of the landscape that an animal might move through? And the most important thing about conservation statistics, of course, is data visualization. Nobody wants to look at a lot of numbers. And so I used Esri mapping software to make these results into maps that we can look at. And the maps show the easiest spaces that bears might use to leave Yellowstone and Glacier and recolonize their historic habitat on the American prairie. That's what you see in this image, the outline of the state of Montana, and these beautiful white lines that, if you focus on the center of the image, create that triangle once again. It's proof of concept. We knew it from our local understanding of the landscape, and now we knew it through a very rigorous statistical design. It's there. These pathways are possible. And using this type of statistical framework and all these different knowledge sources allow us to even ask further questions. What if we overlaid some of those pathways with human land use variables? Let's try one that's really important to bears, like agriculture and ranching. If we put the locations of agriculture and ranching landscapes onto this image, it might look something like this. And all of a sudden, that beautiful triangle of potential pathways for bears to disperse between protected areas is slightly obscured. And this isn't new information. Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and many of the stakeholders and collaborators we work with have been addressing what to do in these spaces. But in particular, myself and my colleagues at APR are interested in those red and green dots that you see around the American Prairie Reserve. Grizzly bears are on their way to our space, but they're not there yet. And it gives us a tremendous opportunity to go into the communities that we think will be most affected by wildlife and prevent conflict before it starts. We're bringing our ideas with us, and we're sitting and we're listening to what people have to say about the land that they have owned for generations. And so the next step of my work is to iterate this statistical modeling approach and involve the community even more than before to get to the real stuff: attitudes, tolerance levels, belief systems, and include that in an actual statistical framework to make further predictions and to do a better job at addressing people's needs and wildlife needs on this landscape. And so no matter if I am being hands-on with animals or if I am analyzing their landscape from a distance, I am very concerned with making sure that science is addressing the needs of people, because the community is the future of wildlife conservation. And what I've learned through my fellowship thus far with National Geographic and the American Prairie Reserve is that there's this beautiful balance between technical, rigorous science and heart and soul and a compassionate listening ear. Thank you.
Thank you. So my first question to you is, what is it like to hold a baby bear?
I love getting this question, Laurel. And baby bears always steal the show. So I usually like to have the attention and then pull out a bear cub and no one's looking at me anymore. But a lot of folks don't know that bears and dogs have a common ancestor. And so little baby bears are a whole lot like little puppies. And so when you pull them out of their den for scientific work only,
of course,
they're really cold, and so they want to snuggle, and you just have to put them in your jacket, and they like to lick your neck a little bit, and it couldn't be cuter.
I could talk about baby bears for a long time, but I'm going to invite the rest of our speakers back on stage. Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for your very insightful talks. So all of the stories you shared were pretty positive. It was about working with people. The people are happy, the animal's happy, we're all happy. But I'm sure it's not actually that simple, right? Can you talk about some of the challenges you've had in your work? Would you like to start, Dominique?
Of course. Challenges. I think we can talk about it a lot all afternoon. If I say challenge for me as a young woman working in the communities in Gorongosa, the first thing is, I'll say my size apparently counts a lot, because people, especially in the communities, first question is, how old are you? But then when we pass that, of course, there's a lot of healing still to be done for the people, especially in Africa, I would say, to the people who live near protected areas. There's a lot of work, so people start to understand more about the value of having it, instead not looking at it as a cost. So for me, being in the field, for example, talking to communities, is always about how I present myself and how I respect the traditions. And I do, and the most fascinating things is seeing other girls and women and general people in the community just looking at me fascinated because I'm wearing pants. Yes, but then after that is also, they also look even more surprised when they see that I know the traditions and I follow it. And it's very genuine because they're also my traditions, so.
Thank you. What about you guys?
Well, in our case, the greed of the commercial fleet is really immense, and we have to deal with that every day. The fishing industry today fishes in 95% of the world's oceans, and every time that we want to protect a place, they are with their lobby, and they get to the governments and they make phone calls. So they try to stop us every single time. And if it was for them, they would fish everything out. I mean, they just don't care about sustainable fishing. So there's a big pressure, like political pressure and power, to stop us from achieving our goal. So imagine how it's going to be in the next years when we want to protect 30%. We are very aware of that, and that's why we will have to be more effective and smarter than ever if we want to win.
Yeah, and I could talk about challenges, of course, all of us as conservation scientists can. But one main one is, we're in the business of restoration. And the landscape where I'm working with the American Prairie Reserve, the wildlife were extirpated from that landscape deliberately, right? It wasn't an accident that we have local extinctions and that we're trying to rebuild a wildlife community. And so along with this goal of rewilding comes a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of kind of cultural differences. So for many people on the landscape, cattle ranching or agricultural production means something very deep in an identity way. And I may see, as a scientist, lives in the East Coast, has a lot of education and can do the modeling and create some proof, I might see a lot of potential in a landscape. But what's most important is understanding where people's hearts are. And that's a challenge for both of us on both sides, for us to all realize that we have the same goals. We want to see people thrive, and we want to see wildlife thrive without any feelings of disrespect or malintent. So I found that, I find math and science and statistics really challenging. But even more than that, it's just getting to the heart of things with people and building trust.
So speaking of where people's hearts are, Dominique, you talked about how you're almost incentivizing people to support the park by offering benefits like healthcare and education. And Alex, you talked about how hard it is to get people to care. So my question is there a difference between incentivizing people to support something and to getting them to care? And does the difference matter if it maybe leads to the same result, or maybe it doesn't?
Well, I'll say in and around Gorongosa, people do care. The place is not just something that someone brought and put in there. It's always been there. There's deep connection between the people and the environment, the forest, the wildlife. As I always say, it's part of our beliefs, our totem. But as I said again, there's need for healing. So not only incentives, but benefits, actually, is provide decent benefits that, helps not only for people to, I wouldn't say care because they do care, to support, but really create a virtuous cycle. Because if we talk about a benefit as education, it's not something that you receive today and it's over in a month or so. It's something that builds up, and we will only see the return of that in maybe 5-10 years. So that's where I stand. It's not just incentives, it's really real opportunities in life that will create a virtuous cycle for us. So, yeah.
Well, in my experience, it's very important that people feel some ownership of the marine reserves that we propose. I really don't think that there can be like an external force or maybe just a top-down approach where people just order things and then the rest follows. In our case, and I think this is going to be even stronger in the future, we have to make people participate, very actively participate, and you have to listen to them, and you have to incorporate many of their visions so the final solution represents a whole. Of course, we cannot satisfy everybody because some people may say, everything should be open to fishing, and that's not what we want. We have to explain very clearly the facts and the science and what are the impacts of each option. And then be persuasive so everybody's on board of one single solution. And we believe that marine reserves, when they are fully protected and they are well located, they can satisfy things in a way that everybody wins. Like fishermen, for example, when they are opposed to these reserves, sometimes or most of the time, they realize that if they protect one place, then they will be able to fish more outside the reserve, and so on. So everybody has to understand what's their share and how they can win, and then they feel actively involved and be actually proud of the reserve that is finally created.
What do you think, Ray?
Yeah, well, I have a great story to tell, and I'm so excited to tell it. And it's about my first trip to Montana, to the American Prairie Reserve for the beginning of my fellowship. And there's a big dinner that was created up on the reserve, which is really hard to access. And it was for ranchers. So it was a big dinner just for cattle ranchers on the American Prairie Reserve. And one of them stood up and said, "It is against every value and principle that I have to be here and to be a fan of APR, but I am." And the reason was that this individual and their family had tried out some of the American Prairie Reserve's wildlife-friendly ranching techniques. And APR has created a whole program called Wild Sky Ranching, and it incentivizes ranchers to adopt some environmentally friendly procedures and in turn get some extra funding on their ranch. And the trade-off is that they're doing something great for the environment, in particular for large mammals. So for black bears, for mountain lions, for some of the larger bodied mammals that are there already. And this person is making more money than they were before and also facilitating the restoration of the prairie. And they didn't want to like it, you know? And so it's exactly what you said, where an incentive for an individual actually was able to change their action and their dedication to a cause. And it's a wonderful model that APR has developed that I'm trying to just shout from the rooftops. And we're hoping that it can serve as a model for other organizations within the Last Wild Places initiative.
Earlier, Dominique, you talked about how when you go into these communities, they're surprised by the fact that you know the culture because it's your culture too. And on the other hand, you've also talked about how you work with people that you might completely disagree with or you might not understand or might not understand you. So is it important to have locals working in conservation? And if you're not a local, how do you bridge those differences? Dominique, do you want to start?
Of course, it's important to have locals. As I said, I'm here and I'm from there. I know the tradition. I didn't just learn to be able to do the work, but I grew up following those traditions, which make it very genuine. But it is important also that others, when they come, they follow it, because people need to feel respected. People want to feel heard. And when that happens, they open many, many doors. One of the things that happened was, as I also work with human and wildlife coexistence, I like to be optimistic. When first times I went there was just a lot of, a lot of trauma, a lot of just hunger. But I start to just listen more and follow their traditions more. For example, instead of just go there wearing my pants, I would put my traditional clothes. And they start to see that actually she meant it, she knows what she's doing. She's part of us. So it became, the last thing, it became that it's not anymore your elephants, our farms. It's our elephants in our landscape. So this is a big change that it takes time. So wherever, if you're from there or not, take time and invest in listening and learning and really just paying that tribute to the local people, because they're going to be the ones who are going to really doing the thing on the ground.
Yeah, and as you can imagine, I'm the opposite of Dominique in a lot of ways, where I am quite non-traditional in the landscape where I work in terms of identity. And so it's something that I'm constantly learning is how to be effective with my identity and my presence in the space. I know everything about bears. I know everything about them. I don't know everything about Montana, and that's really important. I can't pretend that I do. And so coming with humility and with sincerity and authenticity is important. And one cool thing is intersectionality, just as an individual. I am who I am, but there are things that I have in common with some of the folks that I'll be working with or some of the people that I hope to, come into cooperation with. Whether it's, we're both interested in a certain type of outdoor activity. I'm a mother, and there are lots of mothers in Montana. And so that has been a really great entryway into just getting people to build trust and to just find some common ground in order to start those hard conversations.
Alex, what have your experiences been?
Working with the local communities and especially indigenous people is fundamental. It's all about a very sincere connection with them. You have to work with them in a very authentic way. This is not about just bringing a manual and try to apply a formula. This has to be tailor-made, and you have to build that trust. And that means being with them in the good and the bad times. In Juan Fernandez, for example, Juan Fernandez Islands in Chile, I worked with them for 10 years. And the change in the relationship I had with them had nothing to do with the marine conservation. They were hit by a tsunami and they lost half of the town, and a lot of people died in that tragic event. And I decided to stop my work, my campaign, and raise some funds with the organization I used to work for, Oceana, and we launched a big effort to hire all the local divers to get all the marine debris from the water so we can start rebuilding that place. Then they said, okay, now we can work together. Finally, after 8 years, we created the Juan Fernandez Marine Reserve and the Desventuradas Reserve that add 600,000 square kilometers of ocean protected.
Wow, thank you. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. I want to thank you so much for everything you've shared, and can we please give them one last round of applause?